Hey, B-Siders. Welcome to another episode of Bravo for the B-Side. This is Jim.
And this is Dani.
And I am back after this is going on. We're in 6 weeks now.
Welcome back. We'll see how it goes.
My voice about 90% back. 3 solid weeks of that, whispering.
Yeah.
That sucked.
Yeah, I lived through it.
Yeah, I know you did.
Yeah.
But I am back. Sorry that I did not get to do the Hereditary episode. It was really
you had a lot of thoughts.
So many thoughts. But we are moving on from that and wanted to make sure, as long as this thing holds out, or however it sounds, that it went.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. You guys got to listen to it. That's just the way it goes. But this is, the year-end retrospective, and could not miss this.
It's an important episode. I like the routine, I guess. What's the word of capping off our year, in film.
Yeah.
By talking about someone who's important.
Yes.
To the history of film.
Yes. And we picked a good one.
I think so.
I mean, they've all been good.
Yeah.
But we had our compiled list of potential subjects.
Yeah.
And we talked about them. This was one I really felt soared to the top.
And when we were talking about our list, we kept coming back to him.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a second. A little housekeeping. Just reminding you folks, go to our website, lordsofmisruleproductions.com. Check out everything from the podcast to our other projects. There are links to our Patreons, one for the podcast, one for the production company. Take your pick. Please, would be very nice if we got some subscribers.
Yeah.
Patrons. That's the key word.
Yeah.
Patrons. For either, primarily the podcast, if I have to pick, because we can work on the other one. But also, go back and check out old episodes, check out old interviews. We got a lot of people doing a lot of things. We have in February, Cliff Cable, Marty Catola, and their Talking Pondo, Making Pondo.
We will be guests.
We will be in a February episode, so we will be talking more about that as the time comes closer, which is pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
We also have David Ryan Keith in March.
Yes.
Is going to be releasing Primal Games. It's going to be distributed.
Right. I'm excited because it's very good.
We plan on having him on the show to talk about making that movie and a bunch of other stuff. Because, with David, it just goes everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Our good friend Jeff Notkin is looking to pop on, and we can't wait to get him on.
I'm so excited. I don't even care what we talk about with Jeff. I just want to chat with him.
I know, right? Like I said earlier, we could just call him up and he'd be like, go.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what else? So speaking of Pondo Boys and Jeff, who I always say Pondo Boys, Pondo Enterprises, but Jeff's own production company, Desert Owl Productions. Please remember that name. I should mention it more.
Mm-hmm.
But Pondo Boys is just so simple. Brevity. For the first time, the trilogy is together. On Amazon Prime Video, we have Writing Frenzy, Revenge of Zoe, and Love Song of William H. Shaw. All available in the same place. This is huge.
This is the first time ever.
Yes.
They've all been available in the same place.
Yep. We were just explaining to Lily earlier that it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we found them, all that was out was Revenge of Zoe.
Yeah.
Because Writing Frenzy had only been distributed on DVD, very short period of time.
Right.
And was gone. And through all of the things, we got talking to them, and Eric Schumacher sent excuse me, sent us his copy of Writing Frenzy from his shelf in his office,
A
so we could watch it.
a gracious person, Eric Schumacher.
Yes,
Yeah.
goes without saying. We're going to be looking at the goings on of like Kyle Hester, Lowell Dean. He's got a movie coming out. We're going to hop on that, see if we can get him on.
Right.
Our previous episode to Hereditary was the repost of the David Howard Thornton interview from 1921.
Yes.
2021. Jesus Christ. 1921. I'm concentrating so hard on speaking.
I get it.
I can't think of anything properly. We would like to have David on again. We'll see what we can do, but he is a super busy man. He is in the prime time now.
Yes.
And admittedly, we are, a small show. We've had some stellar people on here. We've lucked out on that.
We have been incredibly, incredibly lucky.
Yes. So fortunate to have these gracious, wonderful people on the show. And some reached out to us, which even, swelled our heads a little bit more. But we'd love to have David on. 2025, we're going to start hitting some interviews. Still have some techie things to work out.
Yeah, but I know you want to play with our setup a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's pretty much what's going on. Did I miss anything?
No, not necessarily. I wanted to comment on how freaking cold it has been in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
My God.
I mean, there used to be a progression.
I know.
Of weather. Like fall used to be my favorite time of year. This year it sucked ass. Here it is, we're recording on December 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been super cold and then warm. Super, super windy.
I know.
I don't know how many trees are down, but I was out with Lily that super windy day, and you said all you could hear was trees in the distance falling down. So we've probably got like a dozen trees down in the woods across the paths. And
I know.
And, this sudden pressure change and temperature changes. This just is, it's global warming. It's tearing us up.
It's gross.
Yeah, because I don't even know what to expect.
No.
It's ridiculous. That's all I wanted to cover. Again, check out our Instagram, check out our YouTube channels. Those are on the website as well. Like, follow, subscribe. Check out the people that we follow, the people who are mentioned or shown, especially like on YouTube, like Kyle Hester. Follow them. Let's keep this indie train going. And really, you do that by helping everybody. And everybody trying to help everybody. So viewers, listeners, watch the movies, rent the stuff, become a patron for folks, excuse me, if you can. And let's just do it, because I'm just going to say Hollywood blows.
It does.
It is not getting better, even though there are some folks who are like, hey, there's all kinds of shit going on. Get out there and do it. And I've seen what's on the slate. Can't. We need another fucking rebooted Spider-Man. Like, I need 8 more toes on my elbow, right? Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's get to some good things.
Yeah.
About not just filmmaking, indie film.
Indie film.
Pure 100% indie film.
Yes.
So I'll introduce this individual. And we are going to be talking about Oscar Micheaux. Black writer, director, producer, 100% indie. From the silent film era up through talkies. Super important contributions to film. To film, to writing, directing, storytelling.
I mean, historically an undervalued underappreciated person
Yes.
in film.
And one of the things that we're going to, as we go through all of this, I'm very excited because the one thing I love about movies and books and paintings and art, creativity of any kind, is the message.
And he had a message.
He did. We've talked about how, you go look at stuff and everyone's debating what the message is. Okay, well, that's kind of the fun of it. But I love it when creators get their message out point blank or thoroughly through threads, however it's done. Because, it's the best medium to do it.
It really is.
Booking a 30-second spot on CNN, not going to have the same impact.
No, but there's just something so tangible about film, even though it's sort of an intangible thing, right? It's a visual medium. It's a storytelling medium. It's an audio medium. It's so much more than looking at a painting. And there's nothing against painting,
no,
or two-dimensional art or sculptures or still life or whatever it is. But I feel like the art form that most closely imitates life is film.
It is. So film, the evolution of photography. As a photographer, all of those thousands and thousands and thousands of images are snapshots of a single instant moment in time.
A frozen moment.
A frozen moment. And without me there to explain the context or the story behind or around, everyone's guessing, making up their own shit, right?
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
There isn't. But, I think sometimes that message is more important and more reaching inside when someone knows it.
Right.
Film, you can do that. You can have the most stunning cinematography, the most beautiful photograph in the world. Turned into a film is beautiful to look at, but you have life happening.
Yeah.
Right? You have movement. You have dialogue, things going on. And hopefully a story. It's not always the case, as we know. But
well, it is interesting though, isn't it? Because we have in our office all these photos, all this artwork that means something to us because we talked to the artists who made it.
Right.
We have a painting upstairs, an original painting from an artist in Savannah. And that painting means something to us, not because of the way that it looks, but because of the experience that goes along with it, the story. There's a word for that, and it's on the tip of my tongue, and I can't remember what it is.
Oh, I don't know. But yeah, we spent hours with this guy. Sat and just talked while he painted another painting, sold other pieces of work, and just sat and talked.
Right.
And
you get the same thing with a film, if you think about like the first film you ever watched, or films that mean something to you beyond what the film actually shows.
Oh, right.
You get that with it as well. But not only that, but film can give you the context within which you enjoy it.
Yes. Any piece of artwork. We've talked about, I think film is the most impactful art because I can remember movies based on pinnacle moments in my life, good and bad. I remember seeking out certain things. Now, books can have the same effect, music especially. Anyone who can hear, I don't think can say there isn't a moment of their life that any kind of music will remind them of. I don't think that's just at all true.
Like a moment that a song reminds you of?
Yeah. Like there's something happens and there's either a piece of music playing that later on in life you hear, right? Brings that back, good or bad, or something very similar. A particular artist or depending what it is, from classical to whatever. Our brains are so rooted. Our memories are only sensory. And the more sensory things, the more senses that are in action when a memory is being produced, the stronger that memory is.
True.
and the greater possibility of recall through exposure to one of those exacting senses.
Right.
You know, people with smells. Let's talk about squatchers.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Sure.
So anyone's had a Bigfoot encounter, they're like, I'll never forget that smell. And anytime they smell something similar to it, takes them back to whatever was going on, But anyway.
Provenance is the history behind a piece of art.
Just took a minute, huh?
I looked it up.
Oh, well, there you go. You're awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we start talking about Oscar, folks, because this is a hell of a ride. And I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you came from, what your status is. If you're a creative in the movie making camp, listen to this. And then after, find out more. Though there's not a lot more to find out, but you never know.
I mean, I feel like you can always find a little bit more information. I mean, we try to do a deep dive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's no possible way we can cover everything in, even 2 hours talking about him.
Oh, right.
But I want to preface this because I'm going to tell you his story briefly, and then we'll talk about his films, and then we'll talk about why he is important to film history, not just in a historical context, but in an innovative, important context.
Right. And also the information, just like the films we watched, which we'll describe, it's still being uncovered.
Yeah.
This is Oscar's kind of a recent focus.
Right.
Which is like so many of our other things. So, bear with us and let's talk about this incredible, incredible man.
Oscar Micheaux was born on January 2nd, 1884 in Metropolis, Illinois, on a farm. He was the 5th child, born to Calvin and Belle Micheaux, who had 13 children.
Yeah.
So he had 12 brothers and sisters. That's some heavy competition.
Oh, yeah.
In his later years, he added an E to his last name, I think just because it looked better. I'm not sure why.
Probably.
But he was born in 1884. His father was born into slavery in Kentucky.
Yes.
So when he was young, his parents moved from the farm to the city, and they wanted to make sure their children attended good schools. So they attended private schools. He attended a well-established school. Ultimately, his parents had some money troubles, and they ended up returning to the farm. Oscar did have to drop out of high school because of that, and he wasn't super happy with it. So he became troublesome and rebellious, as, kids do.
No.
When he was 17, he was sent to Chicago to work in marketing. And he took this opportunity to meet as many people as he could. He made a lot of connections in that, which would later help to serve his film career. He worked lots of odd jobs. I think he owned his own shoe shine business. He did a lot of just various things, ultimately ending up as a porter on the railroads, which was a huge, huge deal for a Black man in the Jim Crow legal racism time.
Yes.
Right? Because the job as a porter was stable, well-paid, secure, and not only that, but he got to travel all over the country and meet people. And what Oscar was very good at was meeting people and talking to people. Eventually, he decided he learned everything he could from the porter job. He quit. He had a nice little nest egg set up.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought land in South Dakota. He actually bought 2, I believe, 160-acre parcels of land.
Right.
a huge amount of land.
Yes.
And he began homesteading. He believed that homesteading was the future for Black Americans.
Mm-hmm.
To supplement his income homesteading, because it's difficult and it's not extraordinarily lucrative, he started writing about his experiences. He ended up finishing an important book called The Homesteader, and 6 other books. And he marketed them on his own.
Yes.
He got married. Ultimately, that didn't work out. She ended up leaving with a lot of his money. She emptied their bank account, basically.
Yeah, she robbed him blind.
Yeah. And then her father sold his land and kept the profit.
So this is while he was out marketing.
Yes.
And by marketing, I just want to point out, he went door to door.
Selling his books.
Mm-hmm. To white and Black people alike.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't care. He just got out there and did it. But he was gone for extended lengths of time.
Well, he was also the only Black homesteader in that area in South Dakota.
Right. So just real quick, how his book came about, he was journaling his stuff. And he would get together with his neighbors, who were all white mm-hmm. settlers, and read his stories. And it became a thing.
Right.
I did read somewhere that it was said that he never actually sat at a table with them. He sat by himself.
Right.
To eat.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this is wild. You know, out in the middle of nowhere, the brazen West still.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and this one Black man.
I mean, even in the early 1900s, the West was still wild.
Well, yeah, I mean, just because we knew it was there didn't mean we'd done anything about it.
Right.
You know, but this one Black man surrounded by white settlers was able to forge that sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as because of that, everything snowballed and those stories were turned into the book and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he did dive back into his writing and focused on publishing his work in papers and, self-publishing.
Mm-hmm.
In 1918, that novel, The Homesteader, attracted the attention of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, which was a Black-owned motion picture company.
Mm-hmm.
They offered to make it into a feature film, but he wanted to be directly involved with the adaptation of his book. Specifically, he wanted to produce and direct. And he wanted like a huge budget for it. He wanted it to be basically like a tentpole film. And they said no. And they never ended up producing the film. However, Oscar took that opportunity to start his own production company using the connections he'd made as a porter. He sold shares in this production company to
mm-hmm.
his wealthy white connections.
Right.
And his friends. And made the film himself. And it was the first feature-length Black produced and Black cast film.
Yes.
And I want to note that even in that time, in 1919, most films, even the ones made by major studios, were short.
Right.
There were like 1 or 2 major motion pictures a year.
Right. They hung around the 45-minute mark, like at most.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the epic.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the most popular film at that time, a feature-length film, was Birth of a Nation, which was a horrible film.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that.
And, he had this feature-length film done in 1919. Charlie Chaplin didn't even make a feature-length film until 1921. So he was very much on the edge of the curve, curve.
Yes.
He premiered the film in Chicago, and he enjoyed a pretty successful time as an independent film producer and director for a while. He ended up producing and filming between 35 and 44 films that are known to this day.
Mm-hmm.
He has credits as a writer on several films, But he made these all between 1919 and 1948. He started in silent films, and then as film technology advanced, he began to make talkies. And many of his films, his company was called the Micheaux Film and Book Company. They were open, blunt, thought-provoking regarding racial issues of the time.
Oscar is quoted as having once said, "It is only by presenting those portions of the race portrayed in my pictures in the light and background of their true state that we can raise our people to greater heights." However, as the Great Depression hit the United States, Oscar had found it impossible to continue to produce any films, so he returned back to his roots of writing for a little while. But the message never changed.
Right.
Oscar Micheaux died on March 25th, 1951, in Charlotte, North Carolina, of heart failure. And he died marketing door to door.
Yes.
I mean, that's a very short summary of a lifetime.
It is.
And we're going to touch on a few things here and there, but again, folks, you know how it goes. And we'll come back to like points in his life that were important as we talk. But I did just want to give a quick, bam, bam, bam. Here's the history. Right. So there are some websites. I will try to get as much stuff in the show notes as I can. A lot of places have these films. They are, however, in such bad shape.
Well, they're very old. I mean,
they're very old. So here's the deal:
many of them are over 100 years old.
A lot of these sites are like fan sites, hobby sites. People who I'm not diminishing them. Let's make that clear. But these are not groups of, millionaire effects artists who had, careers in studios and stuff glomming onto this. The films, as we all know, with pretty much all films prior to 1960s, even some of the 60s, they just, let shit sit in a basement in a box, or they threw it out. Mm-hmm. Right. So what's left has been rotting. The celluloid's been degrading. They've been exposed to all kinds of stuff. A lot of these sites, the video, the film to digital transfer, also not great.
Right.
People just really trying the best they can, because they're like, oh, this is really cool. This needs to be out there.
And it doesn't help that in that time, there was no one concerned with saving film.
No.
Or preserving it.
Right. I know. So when you find these, please understand that what you're watching is not the same quality of film that Oscar produced.
Well, also many of his films, particularly his films, were buried basically literally.
Yes.
For decades.
Yes. So, we'll talk more about all that at the end. So we went through and we picked a couple to watch through to talk about. Now, we didn't take our, normal movie notes. We're not going to
go beat for beat.
Yeah, it's not the film we're here about. It's Oscar. So the first one is The Exile, done in 1931. And the story takes place after the World War. And I love that was the summary. And I suppose you need to do the math. Because they had no idea a second one was coming.
Well, I mean, the whole idea behind the World War was that's the war to end all wars.
Yeah. And then they had another go at it.
Well, they didn't know that would happen.
So anyway, so it takes place takes place after the war. There's a telegram sent to the main character, and this whole thing is somewhat autobiographical. Because it's about owning land in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, we've done this already. The Homesteader.
Right.
Silent. This is a talkie. The sound's rough, which is expected in all off-studio films to a certain degree, because even though they had the technology to do talkies, even the best studio films have they have the noise in the background,
right?
You know,
of the reel.
Yeah, it took so much work that one day we'll find someone who was involved with it and talk about them to be able to put sound to film to the point it is today. Right.
Yes.
So with the 30 style film and the bad shape of the film and the bad transfers, folks, you're in for a ride. No subtitles, by the way. Don't even try it.
No.
But he knew what he was doing. So this is the first film of his that we've seen. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking every kind of shot, every breakaway during a line, the reaction shots, the emotional passive observation shots, and lots of dancing. We'll get to the dancing in a second. Every one of these was so perfect, textbook perfect to that era.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you read a book about how 1930s movies are made, and this is made exactly like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's because he understood we don't need to do anything different. We need to do what's being done, but we need to do it well. And we need to do it I need to do it telling my stories.
Yeah.
Right. And he did it. So dancing at the start, folks, if you watched any of the old early films, you know that they love dancing scenes, and big bands.
Mm-hmm.
You know, big band playing was prevalent in this as it was in so many films. It's a good way to use up time. But most films back then had bands, music numbers, and dancing girls because that was the best way to present sound.
Yes.
Right? There are people who haven't been to these clubs and places in big cities. They don't have phonographs,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they can get into a movie and get a couple performances. Holy shit, that is like king level stuff, you know?
Well,
and everybody understood that.
And a lot of the movies from this time still felt like vaudeville.
Yes.
That was the aim.
Yes.
Right? Was because vaudeville was the most colorful, entertaining, fun, fast moving, get everything in there experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what people wanted to see in film.
Yes. And, he did it. Everything about this movie said to me, movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was all there. And having watched so many, I was able to predict, here it comes. Yep, there's the cut. There's the cut. There's the reaction. There, which is fine. It was just, it kind of astounded me.
I mean, yeah, the characters, they have that classic transatlantic accent.
Yes.
Which is very important.
Yes.
Because that was how you talked, how you talked in the movies. I can't do it because I'm not in practice.
We're not actors.
But it's
from that era.
It's also, the people in this film, they're all black. It's high society. They're in suits. They're in cocktail dresses. This is like a fancy party in a big mansion.
Yes.
And
we're gonna cover some of that, why it was that way.
I mean, it's social club, right?
Yeah, exactly. I just put a note that during one of the big band scenes, there was a young boy coming out doing a tap number,
mm-hmm.
and he was killing it.
Oh, he was.
Right. And I love tap. I do. And I especially love tap that originated in black theaters and then films, music numbers and stuff. There's just much more to it. Recent, I can't think of anyone like today that I look at, but Gregory Hines will forever be in my heart because that motherfucker could move his feet across that floor.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, and That's why I love the movie White Nights with him and Mikhail Brezhnikov. Jesus Christ. The two powerhouses. I mean, Michael Flatley's good, but if I have to say it, fuck him. Right? Hines and Baryshnikov, circles around him. Absolute circles. These guys were masters. But anyway, I just wanted to mention it because it was just so, I don't know, it was just nice.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I can't explain it. Just watching it, I'm like, this is really good. This is nice. I like this. And then when it stopped, I was like, oh, I could have gone for a little more.
I mean, there are also more expensive shots in here, like where you know the camera's on rails because it's moving during a scene.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are high money shots.
And these are things we're going to talk about how this translates to today. To today is most indie films don't have money, but God damn it, when you do, spend it smartly because it will elevate that same script and that same storyboard in ways you can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just want to say one thing about this movie. The entirety of the plot was not terribly clear to me because the sound was so bad, not the writing. There just was so much that was missed because it was it this one or the next one where when they weren't talking, you could hear people talking?
It was the next one.
Okay. And I think that was through the transfer process.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad.
If I remember right, this one isn't actually a talkie. The Exile, if I'm remembering correctly. The other one we watched was.
No, I think
but there's a big portion of the talking gone.
No, because I put it in right here because I wasn't able to understand what was going on.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a lot of, you know. But to this film's credit, the sound, as bad as it was all the way through.
Right.
Some of them have none.
Right.
It's just gone. It's not on the celluloid, which, breaks my heart.
Well.
Anyway, so I know you have some things to say.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a legitimate, production. This is well into his filmmaking career. This is 1931. He's been doing this for, 12 years now, having made this film. But these are quality sets. These are actors. These are, real people acting. And not only that, he is like filling the frames in the party scenes with people.
Mm-hmm.
Packed with people.
Yes.
Fabulous costumes. It's a serious production. He's got mood music in parts. One thing that I did like seeing and reading about him, and doing the research, one thing I learned is that the plots of his films are pretty convoluted. They're pretty complicated, like a little overly complicated for what they needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why sometimes it is a little hard to follow the plot.
Well, it's funny because the plot was, and they are convoluted, which is, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It kind of offsets the bluntness of the message.
It does.
Which if you think about it, folks, if I told you writers out there, okay, come over, we're all going to sit down. We're gonna each write something, like 3 pages. I want you to fuck it up as much as you can with all the convoluted shit, because 3 pages is plenty to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But while doing that, I want that message point blank and clear, not to get lost in all this other stuff going on.
Yeah,
right.
And he had a lot of common themes, a lot of common, messages.
Mm-hmm.
Like a couple of things that he put in basically every film he ever did. But there was one part in this film that just absolutely delighted me. There's a part where the male lead is reading his lines from a little booklet, and he's like reaching his arm behind the female lead's back so he can get the booklet. And then when he's talking to her, the camera is angled so that it might be difficult to tell if you're not paying a whole bunch of attention. But when he's talking to her, he's not really looking at her. He's looking at his lines behind her back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of a delight. Like, I was delighted to catch that in an old film. I mean, it's the oldest trick in the book. Right?
Well, for film, it's the second oldest.
Okay.
But for like plays and stuff, that is absolutely, live performance. That's how it's done. But there was another one that we watched in that scene. They angled the camera as best as they could,
mm-hmm.
where it looked like she was looking at the guy, but you could see she was looking at the cue cards.
Right.
And you could see her irises moving just little bits as she's reading it. And then she'd move her eyes probably 15 degrees to lock with the actor.
Right.
And then go back to the cue card. But her head made it look like she was talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to see her face, you're going to see the movements. But I thought that was brilliant.
And
because you got to do what you got to do.
I mean, they use tricks like that all the time
mm-hmm.
in early film, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they still today, there are actors who write their lines on their hands or on their arm or, like have it sitting in their lap, but their lap is like underneath a table or something in the scene.
Plan 9 from Outer Space style, where
right.
It no longer even pretends, just picks up this fucking script like it's some instruction manual and starts reading his lines.
Well,
oh yes, Plan 9. That is the plan where we.
Well, I actually recently read something that was like an interview with Sean Bean. And he was talking about a scene. Bean. I love Sean Bean too. He's talking about a scene in the Lord of the Rings trilogy where Boromir is giving a little bit of a speech and he's like looking down and he's like, that's because they rewrote all the lines like that morning and I had it printed out and on my lap. So every time I'm looking down.
Getting the next. And you know what? That happens so much. We're not going to segue on this, but that happens so much in any film.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they have script people, script runners, supervisors, everything. That's why they had the whole color coding system.
Mm-hmm.
Because that morning you can get a whole batch full of shit in no time.
Yeah.
Right? You got your makeup time basically to get it.
Yeah. And he was just like, I can't believe I got away with that.
But I mention these things not to dig at it, but I admire, again, this is a man who basically, just to say it bluntly, told the studio, fuck you, I'll do it myself. And didn't just like run out and do it to get it done. Like, see what I did? He did everything the way it was being done, which was the standard, regardless of where the film was coming from,
mm-hmm.
what studio was doing it, what kind of film it was. It was a formula, kind of like we have today.
Yeah.
Every era has a formula of films, rom-coms.
Oh yeah.
Right. That hasn't changed for fucking ever. And I hope they don't, because it is kind of like shifting to different things, but it's a formula that only works. To me, it's the only one that works. When you try to fuck with it, then you're not a rom-com. You're doing something else.
Romantic Christmas movies, which are all over the place. They all have the exact same formula.
Yes.
And you know what? It's perfect. No notes.
The 80s. I don't need to pick out a kind of film. I'm just going to say the 80s.
Yeah.
Every kind of genre had the same formula, and we call it the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that he did all this and learned these camera tricks and had people who could do this. It was just very, very cool. Use everything you can, because not all of his actors were professional.
No, but he did discover a lot of untapped talent.
Oh yeah, there'll be some name dropping.
Yeah. So the other film we watched for this was Lying Lips, 1939. And we'd have watched more films, but, we were busy researching him and listening to stuff about him and reading stuff about him. But we did, watch. So Edna Mae Harris is the lead in this.
This was the one that only had 20 minutes of sound.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. The rest of the sound didn't survive. So we didn't watch the entirety of it. But we got, the gist. And the sound on this is much better than the 1931, The Exile.
I know. And then there's only 20 minutes of it.
And then it cuts. And this is more of a gangster one. So Edna Mae Harris, she's absolutely fabulous in this.
Yes.
And she is like a gangster madam, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Underworld boss.
Yeah. And the writing I thought was kind of smart. It's still kind of convoluted.
Yeah.
But, and this is what they did in a lot of films at the time. They explain the stakes mostly in dialogue. So it's a lot of exposition,
mm-hmm.
which is just about as soon as they could make talkies, that was what they did.
Yes.
And that is where you get that like villain doing their monologue, classic,
mm-hmm.
Trope.
The origin of the Bond villain.
This is why I'm doing this. And
yeah.
This is what I'm going to do. And
22 minutes later at the end of his speech,
right.
Then we're like, okay.
Do the thing.
Someone's going to stop you.
Yeah. But he's in this one, he's following all the Hollywood rules. But he's telling the stories in his voice. And you can just tell it's very important to him.
Mm-hmm.
The stories that he's telling. And the other thing I noticed in here is he is using very large multi-room sets. Like this is a sophisticated studio setup that he has going on.
Right. It's not the 2-wall,
Mm-mm.
which, folks, if you don't know what that is, the 2-wall is the back that they're going to shoot against, and they would move the camera at a slight angle. So there's the one corner usually that had the door
mm-hmm.
to come in. They didn't even have a third wall.
Right.
Right. Because, every wall is money. But yeah, these bad boys were fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about it maybe a little further in. But one thing I want to point out, I made a note on one of the scenes in this one that there was this great scene of a black man yelling at 2 white men. And if you don't know the importance of that, I mean, not everyone's going to. Right? We're getting older. Things are fading away. This is the 1930s in America. Can you imagine the upset in the general population of such a thing happening? How dare someone show that kind of thing?
Yeah.
But here's the deal. Like everything else he did, it was so intelligently done. It wasn't just, hey, let's have a black man yell at white people and, woo, woo, woo. No. He did it in a storytelling fashion. He did it in a creative fashion. He did it in a legitimate fashion. And it was awesome. And he didn't hold back his messages or how he portrayed his black characters. His whole thing was, most of the people in actors are going to be playing people who are educated, who are,
mm-hmm.
Not as basically acting the fool.
Right.
There are a few that do act the fool because everything about him is he was calling out the poor choices that were being made by some black people in terms of their community, trying to get into white community. Not an easy road.
Which is in stark contrast to a lot of other, what they called race films at the time.
Yes.
Which were morality based,
mm-hmm.
right? And the whole point of them was to show Black Americans in a flattering light. Well, in a light that wasn't what the white, controlled studios were doing, which was awful.
Yeah, we're going to be getting to that.
Right? But so these other race films, not Oscars, would show, Black Americans as upstanding citizens, as smart, educated people, as people making good decisions, and they were very wholesome. And, the underlying message is like they're good, which is a great message.
Yes.
But Oscar showed, not just that, but he showed these educated people as complex characters who did have their own problems.
Right.
Right. Who made their own mistakes, who were, who had issues that he saw and he wanted to comment on.
Yeah, none of these people were enveloped in piety,
Right.
right? But his whole thing was equalizing.
Mm-hmm.
No matter the color of the actors in his films, they all had a part to play, and they were all on equal ground. There were this group that these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. This is the group that, man, I wish I'd have made a better choice. And the color was not uniform.
Right.
It wasn't white people bad, black people good, vice versa, which is what, they were combating against.
Yeah.
I mean, he did the thing that I keep saying, I hope one day we can fucking achieve. People are people, good and bad, good choices, bad choices. And that's as far as it goes. Don't need to add anything else to it. Don't need to say, oh, they, what do you mean, who they? He had interracial romance, relationships, problems.
I mean,
right?
That was a very
Portrayed.
common theme in his films.
Yes, but he was relentless.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love about this man is he could have had any number of messages based on growing up when he did in the country where he did.
Right.
And it could have just been venomous, but none of it is. And I just think that is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
So the sad thing about that movie is it was only 20 minutes of sound. So we don't know the rest of the story, as it were.
Right.
But as we were talking about, Oscar's films were made during a great change in the African American community, which was also a great change in the United States. Because after slavery, we had people, living on farms, doing that kind of thing. And then the movement to move to Chicago, particularly Chicago.
Yeah, particularly Chicago.
To make it, to build a better life, right? There was just so much going on. But I think he, with great grace and just bluntness, confronted things with, he dealt with racial relationships between blacks and whites, the challenges for blacks when trying to achieve success in a larger society.
Mm-hmm.
He used his films to oppose and discuss the racial injustice that African Americans received. Lynching.
He talked about, lynching, job discrimination, rape, mob violence, riots, economic exploitation.
Mm-hmm. And, in there was his ideologies, a lot of biographical experiences from his life, which that's writing, folks. That's making a movie.
I mean, everything comes from a writer. Everything comes from you.
Yep. And you may not realize it, but even if you're writing like a slasher horror, something in there's going to be something from your childhood or from your dark back corners of your brain. It's going to influence.
It's colored by your own experiences.
Yeah. The countering of white portrayals of African Americans at the time, which was, they pretty much emphasized black people as being inferior.
They portrayed them as illiterate, as dumb, as very one-sided, one-dimensional.
Yeah. It was, if not super stereotypical, they were the comic relief.
Right.
And not in a good way.
No,
it was bad. I mean, I would say the majority of studios, which were all white run, let's say Hollywood, had a foot in that.
Well, and then there was also, the film Birth of a Nation, which basically, it was endorsed by everyone. It was endorsed by the president. It was endorsed by everyone, in leadership positions in the country, all these white people endorsing it. And basically that whole movie said, it's okay to, lynch black people and rape them and subjugate them.
Right.
And I mean, it basically endorsed all of that awful behavior.
It did. And the thing that he did, and we talked about, some of this stuff is a little convoluted, but his characters were complex.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't one-dimensional, because nobody's one-dimensional. And his films questioned the value systems of both African American and white communities.
Yeah.
And all of this, obviously, there was problems. We're not going to get into all of that, but
he was censored a lot.
Yeah. We have a note. The critic, Lupac, this dude is, described Oscar as pursuing moderation with his films and creating a middle-class cinema. His works were designed to appeal to both middle-class and lower-class audiences.
Which was important because at the time, Black Americans were creating their own middle class.
Right. And that was a logical and admirable goal.
Right.
Middle class. I mean, everyone wants to be super wealthy and get to that 1%, somewhere in their head. But
that's the dream. That's the American dream.
Yeah. But to have a middle class life with 50 years of just literally getting let out of the box and left to find your own way.
Right.
In a country that is doing everything it can to fucking continue to beat you down, that is a high-reaching goal, and he did it.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about this phenomenon called the Midnight Ramble.
Yeah. So in 1994, this is how we learned about this. PBS the American Experience, PBS Experience, released a documentary called Midnight Ramble, Oscar Micheaux and the Story of Race movies.
Okay. As things started to build, like I said, Oscar, we're not saying he was the first Black film creator, nor was he the first maker of race films.
Right.
He just was really good at it. In the South, there were Black theaters, but they ran from midnight to 2 a.m. And some other more progressive theater owners who were white, because money's money.
Oh, yeah. They recognized a want and a need for showing what they called race movies.
Right. So they would also do from midnight to 2 a.m., which was called the Midnight Ramble. They would show these race movies. These movies made by Black studios, independents.
Right. And showing Black characters.
Now, in contrast to what Oscar was putting out, most movies with Black casts were like vaudeville style.
Right.
Like Buster Keaton style comedy, just lots of dancing. It was more like they were filming an actual vaudeville show.
Correct.
Rather than a film, a movie.
In Chicago, this was where, they showed them down south, but in Chicago, this was where race movies really picked up, because Chicago was the cultural center.
Right.
For Black Americans at the time. They were finding and creating their post-slavery identity. And white films, as we talked about, did not show Black Americans in a very good light.
No.
So that was what race movies did. They combated that, showing them in a dignified way. Outside of the theater, Black people were treated horrifically. Lynching didn't tail off until the 1920s. And then we had the D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which came out, which was more widely seen than any film before it.
Yeah, it was the most viewed movie in the country.
And Black people were outraged, righteously so, and tried to have the film banned. And then about 30 different race film companies came out. And we talked about how these films were almost like morality plays, right?
Yeah.
Literally directly in opposition. And Micheaux. Yeah.
It's hard, I know.
It is.
Looking at it.
Yeah, I know. He wanted, one of his big messages that he wanted to put out was encouraging Black people to move west, buy property, buy land, homestead, right? He made his book, The Homesteader. He wrote it. He sold it door to door. And his book sold really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just months after his, deal with Lincoln Pictures fell through because they wouldn't let him direct it, within months he started to make his own film. And this film was 8 reels long.
Yes. Well, so to explain that, 8 reels today would be like a Zack Snyder movie.
Right.
Which we need to not have any more of.
Yeah.
Anyway, so these cameras had such small reels of film.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why 8 of them to make up.
That's a feature.
Yeah.
And he just, off to the races right after that. He wrote, produced, and directed all of his films.
Mm-hmm.
He quantifiably did more than any Black director at the time.
Right. Well, so just stepping back a little bit with The Homesteader,
mm-hmm.
After that, he made 3 more films within the year. So after 1 year and 4 films, he had an income of $40,000. By 1920.
Right.
$40,000. That was not middle class. He,
mm-hmm.
It was just unheard of. And his main goal in all of this, which is why he wrote it into his films, is to show that anyone can do anything.
Right.
I don't want to talk about it, but you kind of got to. This Birth of a Nation nightmare. As creators, we're not immediately on board with censoring. And, hopefully there'll be a point where pieces of shit like that will not inspire people in the wrong way, but educate people and help them develop a sense of empathy for how fucked up things were. I don't feel guilty about the past because I wasn't there. I have a lot of empathy for it. Everyone who had to go through it, I have empathy for the people because of all the shit that created that we're still dealing with today.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And things like Birth of a Nation anger me. And just going through some of the stuff that he had to go through, listening to it angered me.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Anyway.
He talked about interracial relationships, dark skin versus light skin, questions of color, like the need for education, what Black people had to face moving into the cities.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to teach Black people that they could be anything. And he did continually come back to that theme. Homesteading is the best chance for a solid future. And so then we had the Red Summer in Chicago, which was post-war racial riots.
Mm-hmm.
And Oscar produced a response, which he never claimed was a direct response to Birth of a Nation. But the widely accepted consensus is that it is.
You see the side by side.
I know, it's basically exactly the opposite, like frame for frame.
Yeah.
So he produced Within Our Gates.
Yes.
Which is an incredibly important historical film.
Yes, absolutely.
It was the first film to tell the story about racial intimidation. lynching and rape from a Black point of view. And it was incredibly controversial. And it was shown to audiences who had just seen in person, in real life, the riots in Chicago during the Red Summer.
Yeah.
And people were afraid.
Rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
But through this whole man's career, that was one thing that no one's ever talked about, and we didn't find anything. There had to, in his head somewhere, there had to have been fear.
Oh my gosh.
Right? I admire that it's not the talked about thing about him. But again, that's one of the things that made me, folks, when we do these things, folks, I get very emotional. Like with Elise Guy, who's just looking at me from my right. I just get so emotional about the shit, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like something's happening to someone and I can
we can't go back and change what happened.
No, but to just think about what he had to go through, what he had to live with every day, and still not fucking give up.
The
or
bravery
relent
of this man.
Yes.
I mean, we told you about his life, right? In quick beats, right? I mean, he got a taste of a good education. He got ripped from it.
Yeah.
Right? And he went from job to job to job trying to figure out what he wanted to be, what he wanted to do, how he wanted to live in this very charged atmosphere in Chicago in the 20s, right? In the 19 teens.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Right? I mean, it's absolutely wild. And no wonder he thought that homesteading was the best chance for a solid future.
Land ownership.
Right.
Self-sustaining.
Being self-sufficient.
Lifestyle and being able to make money selling crops.
Right.
Right. And take what you need for you, sell what you can.
I mean, if you look at the world today, millennials are all about homesteading right now because it's very attractive, isn't it? When you look at life in cities, right? And then you think, well, gosh, if I could just feed myself with a garden and some animals and not have to, deal with that, it's a very attractive prospect.
It is. And it's the thing, though, is we didn't mention the whole reason Oscar's farm failed was because of a drought.
Right.
So that's why he had to hit the road. He's like, we got to make money. Right. If they hadn't had that drought, we might not have ever heard about him. He may never have made that move. Right. I mean, yeah, they want to publish my stories. I'll write some stuff, but I got the successful farm.
But I mean, he was ballsy.
Well, he was.
The balls on this guy.
So one of the things about Within Our Gates, there was so much discord from both sides.
Yeah.
And by both sides, I don't mean blacks and whites. I mean blacks and whites on this side, blacks and whites on this side, because there were portions of both communities that shared the same view, some on the right side of the fence, some on the wrong side of the fence. Right.
Right.
But because of that, Within Our Gates only lived for a couple of years.
Right.
When the film was released, there were 300 theaters for Black people across the country. It had plenty of places to go.
Well, and also in this world of film, I mean, we don't think about it today because a film comes out in theaters. It's in theaters for a couple of months, right? Then it goes away. We get it home. Everyone, and then we have our Oscars, right? Films of the year, blah, 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 blah. But everyone sort of forgets about a film a year after it comes out, right? It wasn't that way with film at this time. A film would live in theaters for years.
Yes. And this, Within Our Gates, literally got buried for 60 years, give or take.
Yeah.
just unimaginable. This is getting towards the tail end of his career. He had actors, and you can see some of them weren't seasoned, but he had a relationship with Roll Productions.
Mm-hmm.
And Roll Productions came about by professional classically trained actors. So that elevated his later films.
The legendary Phil Robeson made his acting debut in a Micheaux film.
Mm-hmm.
Where he portrayed a preacher as an alcoholic. This film did not do too well.
That upset a whole different group of people.
Well, because it was, you didn't dare criticize a preacher.
That's what I'm saying. That was ballsy.
Yeah.
That was ballsy. Today it's no big deal because it's like, I lose respect for people who make movies around that or include that because I'm like, that's so tropish and easy. It's cheating.
It is. It feels like a cheap shot nowadays, but back then.
Oh, yeah.
It was unheard of.
That's all that was left.
Right?
Like to be, this is sacrosanct.
Right.
And
it was panned, and Oscar argued that his art was honest. It's about the impact of drunkenness. It's critiquing negative behavior that, everyone sees within their communities, regardless of what color you are. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at class prejudice within Black society,
mm-hmm.
because as the middle class rose, there became class prejudice.
Yes.
Right? And in my notes here, I wrote, still kind of sexist, though.
You can only do so much.
Well,
right?
He wasn't arguing for, the rights of women.
No.
But hardly anyone was at the time.
I guess, one would ask, why do you need to make the comparison? Well, you do. If you've got these two things, one in each hand,
mm-hmm.
I can focus on my whole race and fixing that fucking problem, or we could talk about women's rights. Well, the my whole race thing is going to win by a long shot. That's where the thoughts are.
Well,
because until that gets fixed, what is the point? Because a Black woman, right? White women want to vote. They want to do this. They want to do that. Okay. They did their thing and they got their things slowly, piece, and we're still struggling. But a Black woman couldn't even consider that kind of thing because they are a whole group of people who are just being basically terrorized. Let's just call it what it was,
mm-hmm.
So I get it. Not saying one's less important, but it's that, do you kill one person to save 1 million, or do you let the 1 million people die so your favorite person moves on?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I want to talk about this bit.
Is it the coat?
Yes, it's the coat.
Yeah.
One thing about Oscar, he was known.
He was scrappy, resourceful.
His talent for penny pinching was apparently legendary.
Mm-hmm.
So when a woman would come to the offices with a nice coat, while she's off meeting or speaking to somebody, he would sneak that coat onto.
Oh, man, let's check your coat as you come in the door. Yeah. Well, let me take your coat.
And then while she was busy, he'd throw that on a woman, an actor, and have her go out of the building. They'd film like 5-second scenes of this, 5-second scenes of that. Because who doesn't need a scene of your star walking out of a building in an expensive coat?
Right.
Right. And then they'd put it back and the coat owner would never know. And this was going on. So in 1927 is when we had sound.
Well, yeah. So the stock market crashed.
Not too long after that.
Right. And almost all the race production companies went under.
They did. And here's why. So Oscar was one of the first to go with sound,
mm-hmm.
understood the expense understood the magnitude of extra cost, but he did it anyway. It was essential. But then with the Depression, this is where the race film companies caved.
Yeah. So Oscar partnered with the Apollo to get advanced cash.
Yep, Frank Fishman, who was the owner.
To make the first black talkie to show at the Apollo, right? That was how the Apollo was going to make their money back.
Yep.
And he was the only race movie producer. All those companies, 30 plus companies, he was the only one to make the transition to sound.
Mm-hmm.
However, at the same time, Hollywood realized there was money to be made in black film.
Yes.
But the problem was their films reinforced the same old stereotypes. And so now you don't have any black production companies making race films, right? Except Oscar.
Right.
Who at this point in time, because of his, his critiquing, isn't doing super well. Because you have these big Hollywood movies coming out that are black films, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're recycling that same old stereotype. And so they're the new race movies, and those race movies are no longer doing their jobs.
Well, the other byproduct of this convening of bad things happening. I mean, talkies weren't bad, but the exponential cost or rise in production costs was bad.
Because it meant independent companies.
Yes. It's going to be harder, and it did. So the the problem was with Hollywood white studios thinking we got to make some money off of this. The black theaters across the country relied heavily on all these race films by these independent black studios, because they would show them forever and ever, but then they could have, in 2 hours, midnight to 2 a.m., you could do 2, sometimes 3 films, right, in a go, and just keep cycling through them. Well, with the studios gone, films were stopped coming in.
Hollywood started buying theaters all over the place.
They were going broke. Hollywood bought the theaters, and with integration such as it was, they could continue the cycle of, well, we can buy these black theaters and we can let white people go watch movies, and then from midnight to 2 a.m. we can keep that thing going, right? So now we got both audiences.
Well, but the independent race films found it difficult to get into those Hollywood-controlled theaters because Hollywood was showing their own films.
Yeah.
Right? So Oscar adapted at this point, started showing gang films, getting on the trends. However, his films still had his at-heart message.
Yes.
They were critical and disturbing, while the Hollywood films were more lighthearted, more vaudeville-y, more showy.
Right.
Right? And they were what were popular. And people started accusing Oscar of ridiculing dark-skinned black people, which, in fairness, he would portray lighter-skinned black people as more intelligent and darker-skinned black people as, the heavies.
It was white collar, blue collar.
Right. It was classism.
Yeah.
But it was also racism. I mean...
It was. I mean, he has one whole thing about it where light-skinned black woman sees this guy that her parents want her to date, basically, because, they want to unload her, which, in that time, that's what parents did, unload the daughter. Sure. And the whole thing, she was not about it. Look how dark he is. I don't want to be with that man.
Right.
Right?
And a common theme in his films with the interracial relationships was that they would get over the black man and white woman not being able to be together because the white woman had like one drop of black blood. And this was a common theme throughout many of his films. And because it reflected his own personal views.
Yeah. And by the 40s, all of this kind of came to a head. The race movies, the type of films that Oscar made really just were no longer of interest.
His films were no longer resonating with Black audiences.
Well, they weren't because of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that the Black population was like, we're good. It's all good now. We don't need your stuff. They were kind of bamboozled, right? You can come into a white theater because that midnight to 2 a.m. thing shifted,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they would have, I believe it shifted to like mornings. We could, have a Black audience.
Sure.
And then in the evenings, because they wanted white people for the dinner crowds and the whole thing that they had grown and cultivated in white society of you have dinner and then you go to a movie, or you go to a movie and then you have a late dinner, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, yeah, it just kind of pushed all of that aside.
I mean, yeah, the other thing is, and I mean, his films were critical. They were, they were hard to watch.
They were. Right? I think they are still critical.
I think they are too. But the other thing, and maybe, there's a balance to be struck, I think,
mm-hmm.
right? People go to movies as an escape, right?
Yes.
You don't go to the movies to see yourself be criticized.
No, not generally.
Not generally.
Most people don't.
You don't go to the movies thinking, well, this is going to be a tough lesson to learn, but I know it's important for me to learn it.
Right.
You go to the movies thinking, I'm going to watch something fun. I'm going to escape from my real life for just a little bit and watch someone else living a life and, dealing with that stuff.
Yeah.
And Hollywood had their formula that worked for people.
Mm-hmm.
It was escapism. And I don't think that his films provided that escapism that was very desperately wanted in this time.
Right. I mean, and it makes sense. And there's whole waves of the film history where those kinds of things happen.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quote here that I want to put out.
Yeah.
And this is from Oscar. And this is towards the further end of his life. My results might have been narrow at times, due perhaps to certain limited situations which I endeavored to portray, but in those limited situations, the truth was the predominant characteristic. It is only by presenting those portions of the race portrayed in my picture in the light and background of their true state that we can raise our people to greater heights. I am too imbued with the spirit of Booker T. Washington to engraft false virtues upon ourselves, to make ourselves that which we are not. I know we had a little piece of that earlier, but I mean, that is amazing. And as we mentioned,
Booker T. Washington was a big hero of his.
Yes, he dedicated. I
believe he dedicated the Homesteader.
Yeah, the Homesteader.
Yeah.
So Oscar died March 25th, 1951, Charlotte, North Carolina, of heart failure, peddling his stuff. Mm-hmm. He's buried in Great Bend, Kansas, at the Great Bend Cemetery. His aunt and uncle had a farm in Great Bend, and he had spent some time there. And it was always a fond place for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was nice. That was very sweet that he it's kind of like Rosebud, right?
Yeah.
It's like the one place in his life where didn't have any of this shit going on.
Mm-hmm.
Was just to be a young person, And next time we're out that way, I want to find his headstone. But chiseled on his headstone, it reads, "A man ahead of his time." And I don't think you could even make that shit up, And I love that because one of the reasons I wanted to do this, within recent years, we have had a lot of kudos thrown at black movie makers, movies about this and that and this and that. And I'm not minimizing, but I get, and I did get, and I will continue to get soured. It's like, okay, yes, blah, 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 blah. Everyone, you did your, hail so-and-so. Can we move on? Because in my head is always, you're acting like this is the first fucking time this has ever been done. And I wanted to do this episode so that hopefully listeners will spread this on. Yes, there are some people doing some things, but put the brakes on it. They're not the first. They didn't make up their shit. There was a man who, from beginning to end of his endeavor, was impeccable in staying to his vision, making movies, writing these things out, making them, basically just making them,
Right.
And yes, our country is still in a very ugly place. I don't think really any better.
I'm getting uglier every day.
Yeah, we're not even going to go there. But, I just, a head nod to a guy who he beat the other studios because he thought, he saw, he knew what needed to be done, and ended up, keeping his thing alive. He died doing this. This is how I think we should all die. We talk about we're going to be there forever, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to live to 90, spending the last 25 years of my life,
doing nothing,
sitting in my own shit, gumming on a banana, doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What's the fucking point of living just to live?
He died with his boots on.
He did. He died mid-step.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck. That is baller to the nth level,
Mm-hmm.
What a wonderful gift to just keep doing what you're doing right up to the very end. Now, I wish he'd been 81.
Right.
Peddling his shit, it's a great loss. Someone like this is a huge loss to the creative community, to the evolution of history and bringing it forward.
Yeah.
Because, we love movies. I've grown up watching movies. I've seen thousands of films. I don't know how many hours of television, right? I love it all. But we keep finding this shit that has somehow evaded us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we're not like investigative documentarians. We don't spend 40 hours a week digging into shit. We have jobs.
Yeah.
We got to raise a kid. We got animals. Now we got fallen trees.
I mean, this is a hobby, right?
Yeah.
That we hope to turn into something else. But
yeah.
Currently, what it is a hobby. One thing I want to note about him is he, toward the end of his career, had a really hard time, was not successful with his films. He tried one final time to break back into films with his film, The Betrayal. The Betrayal?
Yeah.
Which was shunned from regular theaters. But by this time, Black audiences lined up to see it. There were lines at the few theaters where it was shown. So I think if he'd have lived, if he hadn't died on the road still marketing his films, if he'd have lived, he might have come back.
Right.
I think he had a message and people were starting to get it.
Yeah.
One of his fundamental beliefs was that hard work and enterprise would make any person rise to respect and prominence no matter his or her race.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was right.
Well, I know he was right.
I mean,
yeah.
It wasn't until much later he got some posthumous awards. Mm-hmm. He won the Golden Jubilee Special Award in 1986. Shortly after that, he was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And if we ever get there, we're going to stop by his star.
If we ever get there, we're going to call Kyle Hester
and be like, come.
Well, because he does his walking around. And I mean, it's Hollywood. Those fucking stars go on forever.
Oh, they do.
So there's like multiple blocks he's on, and he'll just like point it down and like, who we got today? You know, who the stars are. So yeah, he's going to come and share that with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2019, his film Body and Soul was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. I will have to check, but I believe Within Our Gates was also
right
selected
yeah.
by the Library of Congress
yeah.
for preservation.
This is all still pretty fluid.
It is.
Yeah, when we say this is very recent, yeah, in 1986 he got the Golden Jubilee Award, and shortly after the Star. But there was no movement. There is no, there's no giant building dedicated to him with all of his stuff and his story and the people who are involved in his story, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't enshrined him in the magic of his lifetime.
Right.
But recently there's all these movements. Let's get these films digitized. Let's get them out there. And there's so many creators on YouTube. There are so many YouTube accounts that show his stuff. Wonderful. Folks, if you're out there, there's also foundations.
I mean, it is embarrassing how only crazy recently we have begun to realize, like, oh, we should preserve film.
Yeah.
Because film is the history of us for a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I was talking about the 80s movies. 80s. Mm-hmm. All you need to do is see one movie from the 80s, and no matter what it is.
You've seen every movie from the 80s.
You've seen every one. But it gives you the 1980s, mm-hmm. particularly the mid-80s. You see not just the fashion and the stuff, but you see the values. You see the, relationships, how they are viewed, right? Every decade has that kind of thing going for it. But yeah, when you go way back, like with Elise Guy, it's the evolution of the story in film.
Yeah.
She did it first. It wasn't cars and horses and pulling wagons and shoveling shit. It was a story, super short, mind you.
I mean, short stories are still stories.
Right, but because of her,
Oscar have narrative film.
Yeah, and Oscar had a platform to tell his story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I guess, the lessons here are many. But for me, primarily, tell your story. Whether it's about you, whether it's about all the shit you made up for this whatever film, do it. One of the things that we have constantly come up against is how close we've gotten to selling a script so many times. And it's like the words of death. If you just change this, or if you're writing a new script, tailor it to this.
Well, and it's interesting because, you might argue to us, well, then change the thing. Well, here's the thing. We do change the thing. But the opportunity has passed, right?
Right. Well, even in our longer conversations, though, the whole point is that's that's not what I'm writing. Right. I'm not writing a movie for fucking 73-year-old Tobey Maguire to don the fucking suit again, but not as like old Spider-Man starting from scratch. Right? Not going to do it. That's not my story. Everything we've written is our story. Each and one, each and every one. So a lot of it, influenced by moments in our lives, like we were just talking about. Do your thing. You need to write your story. And if you're never going to get to the studio, then you know what? Go the indie film route. And guess what? Not every indie production company out there writes their own shit.
No.
They are happy to get a good script. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's got to resonate. And your story isn't for everybody. No movie's for everybody. Sadly, I've had a lot of negative things to say about the movies, some of the movies we've seen since kicking back on, because I expect more, like Hereditary. So much money, so much talent,
Yeah.
and a giant, what the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. You're going to run into that. And if we get a hold of one of your movies, listeners, and we shit on it, well, it's not for us. But
that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make it.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't make it. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep pushing it. Right? Because you know what? Everybody likes something. Like we got on our list for movies we were just going over earlier. Troll 2. One of the worst fucking things ever made.
Horrible. It's terrible. We know it's terrible. We've seen it. But
that motherfucker is living hard and strong on the cult film circuit.
Yeah.
I mean, the people in the, particularly the lead actor, and I don't know if he's still doing it. I haven't really checked in, but up until very recently, he's happy as shit to travel around the country because people throw these Troll 2 conventions.
Yeah.
Not fucking film conventions.
Troll
not
2.
Cult Classic. Yep, just Troll 2. And people from the film show up as panelists. And fucking A. That's what it is about.
It's buck wild.
That is, somebody's piece of shit is somebody else's fucking golden rose. And vice versa.
There should be the room conventions.
There are. Tommy has them all the goddamn time.
There are showings, but conventions?
No. Yeah, he'll do The Room and then Big Shark and do whole signing things and panels at these things. Friends. Yeah. It's just wild. But yeah, do your stuff. Find your tribe. Find your tribe doesn't mean just getting into the creative world and finding like-minded writers, directors, whatever, whoever else. But when you make shit, find the people who like it, right? Find that audience and, man, just embellish, relish them, give them what they want. That's what it's about.
It is.
We've starting to go. We've waxed poetic about the opportunities this podcast has given us that we never thought we would completely different direction. We never thought we'd be talking to actual filmmakers, people who, have made it, quote, end quote. And people who are just like doing it. David Axe, make that shit.
Yeah.
Make it. We're very deeply touched and feel privileged to be a part of that. And that's part of this is, I think we have some things worth saying. When you write a story, make sure you do these things. Shoot a film, do these things.
Yeah, I mean, and it's guidelines, right?
Yeah.
That's not rules.
Well, I'm gonna stick to the story rules though, because I haven't really enjoyed wanton disregard for story structure. Call me old-fashioned. But the kind of story you tell, do it your way. What your story is about, do it your way. Right? As long as you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, you have a plot that goes all the way through, and you hold to, I think, the one thing, if anything I've ever said should be etched in stone. It should be every minute of that film, every scene is pointing to the end. It's following the plot, building the plot, not just there.
Yeah.
Not just there,
Well, and that I think is, the other major lesson from Oscar Micheaux is you can use this medium not just to tell your story, but to enact social change.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Socioeconomic, and mindset change for people. Not just the people you're trying to convince, right, to not be dicks.
Right.
But to, use them as a reflection. Use it as a mirror to look into.
I mean, I think of back to the Dolomite films,
Sure.
right? Blaxploitation films of the 70s.
Right.
I mean, they all tried to, well, I just say do certain things. But then we have like Spike Lee, right? Who hit the scene as this little dude, right? Plays this little part in his film. And to see Lawrence Fishburne running around at the end of that movie screaming, "Wake up." Fuck me. Absolutely. But you know what? Oscar was doing that. So check out Oscar. See his stuff. See what was going on. And follow that through to today. Follow the evolution of those messages and the importance. Because that fucked people up. I mean, that movie was on all over national news and everything. Because it was point fucking blank. It was a black movie put in front of white people. And man, were there things to be said.
Mm-hmm.
And yes. And folks, right now, I don't care what you are, who you are, male or female, what ethnicity, what's going on. Whatever you identify yourself as, you've got a story, and now's the time for that message. Because, man, we fucking need it.
We need stories
across the board.
We need to be able to empathize and sympathize with people who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, who don't act like us. We need those stories. And we need real ones.
Yeah.
Not bullshit ones.
Right. Yeah. Not some bullshit narrative. You know,
I feel like I was shouting.
You were
I
a
felt
little
very
bit
passionate about it.
It's okay.
Okay.
That's what this is about. Yeah. I mean, I could go for another hour just going on about this, but you know, let's honor people like Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
Let's honor these people who went through shit we'll never understand. I'm talking as a white person.
Yeah.
Oh, I hit my microphone.
Good job.
Well, I'm not taking it out. Just going to stay in there. You know, let's understand a couple things. Number one, I believe anybody can write anything. We have a script about a black folk hero, and I think it's pretty good.
I think so.
But you know what? I was also thinking maybe we need to have a little sit down. Because again, while I can empathize, I can grow up in a ghetto. I can have a black stepfather, black sister, a whole slew of, you know, the whole black family.
Which you do.
I do. But I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Because I'm not the one who had the different color skin when all that shit went down and all the various things happened, you know, in life. And without that, I can't 100% be there. Now, I can empathize. I can be angry about what happened. I can feel their pain. I can have sorrow for what happened. I can be ashamed just as a human.
Yeah.
That we can fucking do the things that are going on in the world. And if I have a message, I'm going to put that on paper. I'm going to put that in that script. Maybe I want some, and we've talked about this before. Maybe have someone take a look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Have a person of color read it and go, okay, I see what you're saying, see where you're going.
Here are some things you might want to change.
But how about this?
Yeah.
Or maybe this. And it could be major, it could be minor, but you know what? You're doing a service to yourself and to the people that you are trying to represent in your writing or your filmmaking or whatever. And just be aware there are differences. There are differences, even though we can be the same kind of people. Good example, the lighting in these films is very 30s blown out.
Oh man, it's very washed out.
And I'm going to tell you, as a photographer, that was a whole section of my education on how to photograph people who are not white. Because it's just physics, right?
Yeah.
Light bounces away from something towards a lens based on its color. So when I was doing portraits, I had marks on all my equipment for various skin tones so that everybody's picture looked exactly the same, but I had to do a lot of adjusting, right? Back in the 30s, we didn't have all the shit we got today.
No,
right?
they were like, shine a light on it.
Yep, there's shine a light on it. Can't see. and so blown out in some shots. But,
Yeah.
even Cagney's movies are fucking blown out. That's just the way it was.
I mean, even, Chaplin's movies are blown out. A lot of them.
Yeah. Well, even when we get up to like Marx Brothers and stuff, and it's just, anyway, it's all out there, folks. It's all out there, see the reality, but let's start striving for, this guy's, got black skin or light tan skin. Okay. So is that a problem? Just means you need to adjust something. Let's not make that the issue or an issue.
If we don't remember and reflect on the lessons of the past,
I mean, yeah.
Then it is difficult to forge a path to a better future.
Mm-hmm. Just, I guess I'll close out on the whole subject with Oscar by saying, get your ass up on his shoulders. Join all of the other people, particularly, black directors, writers, who, whether they knew it or not, were standing on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of shit that he started, and either by inspiration from or inspiration within, they were following the same path. Don't be afraid to get on those shoulders, right? Because here's the beautiful thing about history. Great man like Oscar Micheaux, he can hold a mountain's worth of people, right? On that memory. So do it. Do it. Make his message your message. Expand on it. Do whatever.
Maybe not all of his messages, but some of them.
I mean, not necessarily the fine messages of each film.
Sure.
But in general, anyone can do anything. Period.
Yeah.
And you can expound on that. I've always said, everyone has circumstances, and maybe, in theory, anyone can do anything. But the reality is a lot of people can't do shit because there just is no way. No way. So maybe let's focus on inspiring, or let's get that message out. There's no reason these people shouldn't be able to do this. What's in the way? Boom. All right. How do we surround that with 110 pages of script? And so we can say, get the fuck out of the way. Let's let this happen. But be proud. I think, honestly, every movie they find, I would love to see someone remake every one of those things, scene for fucking scene. Just modern version of those films. Maybe a little editing, like I said.
Or restoring or fixing the one where they only have 20 minutes of sound,
Oh, I want to see, I want to see all of his films fully restored.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, in this age of fucking...
Let's remake everything?
Yeah, remakes. I'm just going to call them reruns.
Okay.
Right? Because, on TV, reruns. We watch reruns all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Movies are becoming reruns. They're not even remakes.
I know.
It's just the same fucking thing, just different dude.
Yeah.
And some other wild-ass vision.
And for whatever reason, no one's interested in an original film from a studio.
No, they are.
Independent films.
Studios are just not interested in anything because they know what makes money. Like I said, I'm so done. It's Spider-Man. Fuck. It's Spider-Man. Right? He's way less cool than he's been made out to be, from the comic life to now. But never has he ever hit that point where he's so cool. He needs 87 timelines because we can have different people with different stories. I'm done.
I get it.
Anyway.
With that. Go check out our website, lordsofmisrollproductions.com.
Everything's there. Like I said before, links to our YouTube channels, links to our Patreons, obviously link to the podcast. Well, podcast is on there. Links to the socials. When you go to all these places, like, subscribe, follow, because it's all about algorithms and all that. Share.
Mm-hmm.
Share. I would love to see some more things going on out there.
Yeah.
We'd like to grow. We want to keep doing this. Like I said, we are going to be doing some 2025. We're going to hit like the front end heavy with interviews.
Yeah. I want 2025 to be the year of interviews.
Well, not the whole year, because
all year
stuff I want to see and talk about.
Okay, fine. Half interviews.
But anyway, yeah. I'm going to try and get as much as I can in the show notes by the time this releases with links and stuff, folks. So check it out.
Stuff that we looked at, researched, read, watched.
Yeah.
Also, if you have something you would like us to cover on the show,
yes,
shoot us an email. If you're an actor, producer, writer, director, gaffer.
If you've done anything on a movie, talk to us.
Yes.
Because no director is solely responsible for the film.
Right? No member of crew is so unimportant that we don't want to talk to you.
Exactly. And no matter how I do everything I can, indie film, you are. Because we've talked to folks who've like done almost everything. But there's always somebody else doing something on the set.
And if you're a PA, you know?
Yeah.
Anything.
The theme of the show is every movie.
Experience is important.
Yeah. Every movie has a lesson.
Yes.
Every job has a lesson.
Yeah.
Right? You have something that's going to help somebody, and we'll shoot the shit with you for 90 minutes or more. Not a problem. I mean, this is the world we live in as creatives.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a part. So let's do it. Okay. I don't have anything else to say. I don't know how much more I can say.
This has been our New Year's retrospective on Oscar Micheaux.
A wonderful, brilliant, talented man with, I guess the only word I can call, gumption.
Yeah.
Just fucking hit it and never stopped. Did it his way. There's your inspiration for 2025, folks. Be an Oscar.
What did he say? Hard work and enterprise.
Yeah.
Can make anyone rise to respect and prominence.
Mm-hmm. And you know what's funny? Dreams often require that kind of work.
They sure do.
All right. B-siders.
Until next time.
This is Jim.
And this is Dani.
And we're going to be talking at you soon. Roll into the new year safe, responsible, and pump up those dreams. So January 1st, you just burst that shit all over and hit 2025 hard. And we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Bye.